He kissed her belly and walked out the door. That is the moment Vivienne Hartwell will never forget. Not the champagne going flat, not the empty king bed, not the silence pressing against the walls of that bridal suite like something with weight. It is that kiss. Tender. Practiced. A husband's gesture so natural it should have meant everything. He kissed his pregnant wife's belly, straightened his jacket, and went straight to his mistress. If that were you 7 weeks from delivering your first child, sitting alone in a bridal suite at 3:00 in the morning, reading messages on your husband's tablet that proved the entire marriage was a lie, what would you do? Would you scream? Would you run? Vivienne Hartwell did neither. She closed the tablet, opened her laptop, and started building the most precise, quiet, devastating exit of her life. Before we go any further, if this story already has your heart racing, please take a second to subscribe and hit the notification bell. Stories like this one come out every week, and you do not want to miss what comes next. Drop a like and leave a comment telling me what city or country you're watching from. I genuinely read every single one, and I want to see how far this story travels. Now let's get into part 1. The wedding had cost Raphael Vantrell $400,000. He had not blinked at the number. He never blinked at numbers. That was one of the things Vivienne had was once found oddly attractive about him, that complete unconcerned stillness when other people would have flinched. She had interpreted it as confidence, as a man who had built something real and knew its worth. She had been wrong about so many things. The venue was a grand historic hotel in downtown Boston, the kind with marble floors that had been walked on by senators and shipping tycoons going back to the 1800s. Raphael had booked out the entire top 2 floors. He had flown in flowers from the Netherlands. He had insisted the champagne be a specific vintage that required 3 phone calls to locate. Every detail had been considered, arranged, and executed with the same methodical precision Raphael brought to everything in his life. What Vivienne had not understood then, what she understood now with painful clarity, was that Raphael had never been planning a wedding. He had been staging a performance. There is a difference. A wedding is something 2 people build together, with arguments about the guest list and compromise over the flowers, and one person crying in a fitting room because the dress is somehow wrong, and also perfect at the same time. Performance is something one person engineers for an audience, where every element exists to create a specific impression, and the other person on stage is just another prop. Vivienne had been the prop. She sat now in the center of the king-sized bed in the bridal suite, still in her wedding dress, because she had not been able to bring herself to change out of it, and she thought about the woman she had been 12 hours ago, standing at the top of that marble staircase, looking down at Raphael in his perfect black tuxedo, and feeling, despite the pregnancy fatigue, despite the low ache in her back, despite the nerves, genuinely, stupidly happy. She had loved him. That was the part that made her chest tighten, in a way she could not quite name. Not grief exactly, not anger yet. Something worse than both the particular humiliation of having loved someone completely and discovered that your love was data they collected and weaponized. The tablet sat on the nightstand where Raphael had left it. She had not meant to look at it. That needed to be said, even if only to herself. She had reached for her own phone in the dark. She was 32 weeks pregnant, and waking up 3 times a night was just her life now, and she had grabbed the wrong device. The screen had lit up automatically with the notification. "I'm here. Same suite. I missed you." Vivienne had stared at those words for a long moment before her brain fully processed what they meant. She had thought, with a strange calm that surprised her, that there must be an explanation. A wrong number. A friend with terrible timing and a poor sense of humor. She had unlocked the tablet. Raphael had never been secretive about his passcode, which she now understood was because he had simply never imagined his pregnant wife would have a reason to look, and she had read the name. Celeste Navarro. And then she had read the rest. Vivienne was not, by nature, someone who read other people's private messages. She had never been the suspicious partner, the one checking phones and demanding passwords. She had trusted Raphael because she had believed he was the kind of man who earned trust, who valued it, who understood that trust between 2 people was not a renewable resource. Once you burned through it, you did not just go back to the store for more. But she read the messages. She read all of them. It took nearly 40 minutes. Conversation thread with Celeste Navarro stretched back almost 4 years, predating Vivienne's relationship with Raphael by nearly 8 months. The messages were not coded or careful. They were affectionate in the way that messages between people who have known each other a long time become affectionate shorthand. Inside references, the accumulated texture of a shared life that Vivienne had never been permitted to see. There were photographs. Vivienne looked at exactly one of them before she scrolled past and did not look at any more. What stopped her? What made her set the tablet down on the mattress and press both hands flat against the comforter and breathe with slow, deliberate control was not the photographs. It was a message from Raphael, sent 8 days before the wedding. She doesn't know anything. She's not the type. And honestly, after the baby comes, she'll be so occupied. She won't notice if I'm gone 3 nights a week. The marriage is cover. Perfect cover. Her family name alone is worth more to me right now than anything else she brings to this. Calder is already sniffing around the Devereaux, accounts a legitimate marriage to the Hartwell daughter, buys me at least 2 years before anything gets close enough to matter. Vivienne read it twice. Then she placed one hand over her pregnant belly. Feeling the small, insistent movements of the baby inside her, he had been active all evening, probably responding to all the music and noise of the reception, and she sat very still for a long time. "Okay," she said softly, to the baby or to herself, or to no one in particular. "Okay." She put the tablet back exactly where Raphael had left it. She got up, walked to the bathroom, washed her face with cold water, and looked at herself in the mirror for a full minute without looking away. The mascara had tracked a little under her eyes. She cleaned it carefully. She straightened the wedding dress. Then she came back to the bed, opened her laptop, and began to think. This was something people did not always understand about Vivienne Hartwell. She was not a crier in crisis. She saved the crying for later, when the immediate problem was solved and she could afford to feel things. It was not strength exactly. Her college therapist had once suggested it might actually be a trauma response. This ability to go very quiet and practical in the worst moments. But right now she was grateful for it, because Vivienne had a problem. Several of them, actually. She was 32 weeks pregnant and physically dependent on the city, where her husband ran a criminal organization that, based on those messages, was currently under significant federal scrutiny. She had signed documents at the wedding legal agreements she had reviewed with her own attorney, had felt comfortable with, had believed were standard marital financial structures that now took on an entirely different shape when she considered them through the lens of what she had just read. She thought about calling her mother. Then she thought about what her mother would say, not out of cruelty. Just the reflex of a woman, her mother's age, who had been taught that marriage was a permanent structure you maintained, regardless of the weather inside it. She thought about calling her sister. Her sister thought about calling her sister. Would want to come to the hotel immediately, and if Vivienne's sister appeared at this hotel tonight, Raphael would hear about it within an hour. She thought about calling Simone Calder. Simone was not related to the federal investigator Raphael had referenced in his message. Different Calders. Boston was full of them, but Simone was Vivienne's oldest friend, the kind of friend you made at 14 in a terrible art class, where you were both objectively bad at pottery and found each other hilarious about it. Simone was a corporate attorney who had spent the last decade doing the specific kind of work that Vivienne suddenly needed someone to understand. But it was past 3 in the morning, and Raphael would be back. Vivienne looked at what she knew. She organized it the way she had been trained to organize things. She had studied art restoration for 4 years, before Raphael's world had gradually absorbed her own ambitions. And art restoration was fundamentally about patient, systematic analysis before any intervention. You did not touch the painting until you understood the painting completely. Raphael believed he had married a quiet pregnant woman who was grateful for his protection and too overwhelmed with impending motherhood to examine the fine print of her own life. He had made the marriage appear legitimate. To do that, to make it convincing to exactly the kind of scrutiny he was apparently trying to deflect, he had given her real legal authority over certain financial structures. Not symbolic. Actual. The kind that a competent attorney would recognize as genuine, because anything less would not have served his purpose. He had underestimated her, not maliciously. He had simply never considered that she might be looking. Vivienne closed the laptop. She lay down on top of the comforter She could not bring herself to get under the sheets of a bed she was supposed to share with Raphael on their wedding night, and she stared at the ceiling, and she thought with complete, cold clarity about what the next 7 days needed to look like. Raphael returned at 7:15 in the morning. She heard his key in the door and was already sitting up, the laptop closed, the tablet exactly where he'd left it, her face arranged into something she hoped read as sleepy and slightly relieved. The pregnancy made the fatigue convincing. She actually had barely slept, but the shadows under her eyes were the same shadows that had been there for 6 weeks. He looked freshly showered. His hair was damp. He smelled like different soap. Hotel soap, she registered automatically, though not the soap in their bridal suite. Hey, he crossed the room and kissed her forehead. I'm so sorry, it went long. It's okay. Her voice came out exactly right, a little flat, a little tired, not angry. Pregnant wife tired, not betrayed wife flat. Did you sleep? A little. The baby was moving a lot. Raphael sat on the edge of the bed and put his hand on her belly with that same practiced tenderness she had once believed was real. The baby kicked, right on cue, and Raphael smiled. And the thing that Vivian noticed, the thing that would stay with her for a long time afterward, was that the smile looked completely genuine. That was perhaps the most frightening thing about him. He could love something and use it simultaneously, without any apparent internal conflict. Everything okay? He asked, meaning the baby. Everything's fine, Vivian said, and she smiled back at him, and she kept her hand over his on her belly, and she thought about the messages on the tablet 2 feet away from them. I'll have room service sent up, Raphael said. Whatever you want. Eggs, she said, and fruit and coffee, but decaf. Done. He stood, went to the window, pulled out his phone, and began making calls as though it were an ordinary morning. Which, for Raphael, it probably was. Vivian watched his back and thought, 7 days. She was going to need exactly 7 days. She was going to smile at the right moments, and ask the right questions, and express exactly the level of mild newlywed concern that would register as normal. She was going to be, for 7 more days, the woman Raphael believed he had married uncomplicated, a little overwhelmed, grateful for his attention when he gave it, and untroubled by his absences when he didn't. And while she was doing that, she was going to dismantle every financial structure he had given her legitimate access to, copy every record she could reach, encrypt it, distribute it to the right people, and build herself an exit so complete that by the time Raphael realized what was happening, there would be nothing left to chase. She thought of the apartment she had given up when she moved in with Raphael, a small place in the South End with a bay window and decent light, the kind of apartment where she had kept jars of brushes on the windowsill and worked on small, personal restoration projects on weekends. She had given it up because Raphael had a townhouse with 6 bedrooms, and it had seemed, at the time, like a reasonable trade. She thought about the apprenticeship offer she had declined 18 months ago. A studio in Florence, a master conservator named Battista, who had seen her work at a small exhibition, and sent a formal letter. She had turned it down because Raphael's life had made it impossible to simply move to Italy for 2 years, and at the time, she had been choosing their future over her own. She let herself feel, very briefly, the full weight of what had been taken from her, the years, the apartment, the opportunity, the ordinary, dignified privacy of a person whose life belongs to herself. Then she set it aside. She needed to be useful right now, not sad. Simone picked up on the second ring. Vivian called her from the bathroom with the shower running, which was not subtle, but was the best she could manage. And she kept her voice very low and very even, and said simply, I need to meet. Not here. Not my phone. Can you find somewhere this afternoon? Simone, who was a good attorney precisely because she understood when not to ask questions, said, the Beacon Hill place. 4 o'clock, yes. Are you safe? Vivian considered this. Safe was a complicated word. She was not in physical danger. Raphael was not. As far as she knew, a man who resolved marital problems with violence toward women, especially pregnant women who represented both a legal exposure and a strategic asset. But safe in any larger sense? She was living inside a criminal enterprise she had not known she was marrying into, carrying a child who would be born into it regardless of what she did next. And she had approximately 7 days before the very particular kind of danger that came from financial exposure would become impossible to outrun. For now, she said. I'll make some calls, Simone said. That afternoon, while Raphael was in real meetings, she had stopped trying to parse which of his activities were legitimate and which weren't, because the answer she was beginning to understand was that the distinction barely existed. Vivienne told him she wanted to visit her mother. He sent a car. She redirected it 3 blocks from the hotel, walked 2 more blocks, and found Samson at a corner table at a restaurant so ordinary and mid-priced that it was essentially invisible. Tell me everything, Simone said. Vivienne told her. All of it. From the tablet notification to the messages to the specific language Raphael had used about the marriage being cover and about Vivienne's family name and about the federal investigator he'd referenced. She spoke quietly and quickly, watching her own hands wrapped around a glass of water, and she'd stop until she had laid it out complete. Simone listened without interrupting. When Vivienne finished, Simone was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "The documents you signed. Walk me through them." Vivienne walked her through them. Simone asked 4 specific questions. Then she sat back in her chair and looked at Vivienne with an expression that was not quite surprise, but was something adjacent to it. "He gave you real access," she said. "I know. He actually put you on these structures with genuine authority. Not limited, not contingent. He needed the marriage to look real," Vivienne said. "It had to hold up if someone examined it closely. And he never thought you'd actually look at what you had. He thought I was decorative," Vivienne said, without particular bitterness. "Just the fact of it. And temporary." Simone pulled out her phone and typed a name, Lenora Pierce. "She's the best forensic financial person I know," Simone said. "She's done work on 3 major federal cases in the last 5 years. She's also extremely discreet, because her clients tend to need discretion the way other people need air. Can she start immediately? I'll call her tonight." Vivienne nodded. She looked out the window at the ordinary Boston street. People walking dogs, a kid on a scooter, a woman arguing into a phone, all the completely unremarkable movement of a city going about its day. And she thought about the painting she had restored in her 3rd year of graduate school. A small oil portrait, 16th century, water-damaged, with a crack running through the wooden panel from one corner almost to the center. Her professor had told her, "The crack is information. Tells you where the stress was. You work with it, not against it." She thought she understood something about that, now that she hadn't before. "Simone," she said. "Yeah, I'm not going back to him. I need you to know that. This isn't about confrontation or negotiation. I'm leaving. I need to know how to leave completely." Simone met her eyes across the table. "Then that's what we're going to figure out," she said. Vivienne set her water glass down. Outside, the ordinary city kept moving. And somewhere across town, Raphael Ventrell sat in a meeting, confident in the quiet, uncomplicated woman he believed he had safely married, with no idea that she had already begun. Lenora Pierce was not what Vivienne had expected. She had expected someone corporate, someone who carried a leather briefcase and wore the kind of suit that communicated seriousness before the person inside it said a single word. What walked into the back room of Simone's office at 7:15 on a Tuesday morning was a woman in her late 40s, wearing a paint-stained canvas jacket, carrying a battered laptop bag, and eating an everything bagel with complete commitment. "I finished 3 bites of this in the car," Lenora said, by way of greeting, dropping into the chair across from Vivienne without ceremony. "I refuse to waste a good bagel. You can start talking while I eat." Vivienne looked at Simone. Simone shrugged. "She's the best there is." "I know I'm the best," Lenora said, not unkindly. "That's not ego. That's just accurate. Now." She set the bagel down, opened the laptop, and looked at Vivienne with eyes that were sharper than the rest of her presentation suggested. "Tell me what he gave you access to." Vivienne told her. Lenora asked questions the way a surgeon makes incisions precise, purposeful, no wasted motion. She didn't react to the names or the numbers. She typed steadily, and occasionally made a sound that was not quite a word, just a small noise of acknowledgement that meant she was processing. After 40 minutes, she leaned back and looked at the ceiling. "He's an idiot," she said. "He's actually quite intelligent," Vivienne said. "Smart people make the worst mistakes because they trust their own intelligence too much." Lenora turned the laptop around. "Look at this structure here. He put you on this as a co-signatory with unrestricted access because he needed the marriage to look bulletproof from the outside. And it does look bulletproof. It looks completely legitimate. That's the problem for him. She tapped the screen. It also means it actually is legitimate. You have real authority here. Not the kind where someone can dispute it later and win. The kind where if you exercise it, it holds. Vivian studied the screen. She had a decent grasp of financial structures. Her family had money. She had grown up watching her father manage it. She had sat through enough estate planning conversations to understand the basic architecture. What Raphael had built was more complex, but the underlying logic was recognizable. How much? Vivian asked. Lenora took another bite of her bagel, chewed, swallowed. Carefully done? Without triggering automatic alerts in the first 72 hours? I'd say somewhere between 3 and 5 million. Depends how clean you want to be about it. I want to be completely clean, Vivian said. I want nothing he can come back on later. Every dollar I take, I want it to be a dollar I am legally, unambiguously authorized to take. Then we stay inside the structures he established. Lenora nodded. 4.2. That's the number I'd target. Above 3, below 5, inside the access boundaries he voluntarily created. The number sat in the air between them. $4.2 million. Vivian had grown up with money, but not with that kind of money. She thought about what it represented, not luxury. Not at this point. Not after everything she now knew about where Raphael's money came from and what it had cost. What it represented was distance. A margin between herself and the reach of a man who had built an empire on the principle that everything could be owned and everything could be used. I need something else, Vivian said. Records, Lenora said, before Vivian could finish. Yes, smart. Lenora closed the laptop. The money protects you financially. The records protect you physically. If he has a reason to stay away from you, a reason that costs him significantly more than finding you would gain him, he stays away. She looked at Vivienne directly. You understand what I'm saying? The records aren't leverage you ever use. They're a deterrent. The fact that they exist, and that the right people know they exist, is enough. I understand. Do you? Because there's a version of this where someone decides to use what they know offensively, and that version ends very badly for everyone. I'm not trying to destroy him, Vivienne said. The words surprised her slightly as she said them, because she wasn't sure they were entirely true, and then she thought about it for another second and decided they were. She wasn't trying to destroy Raphael. She was trying to leave. I just need him to have a reason not to follow me. Lenora studied her for a moment. Okay, she said finally. Then we do this right. They spent the next 2 hours mapping out the plan. Not in broad strokes, in specifics. Which accounts? In what order? With what documentation to support each transfer? Which records were accessible through the financial structures Vivian was authorized to use, and which would require more careful collection. Lenora worked with the methodical calm of someone who had done this kind of thing before, which Vivian gathered she had just usually from the other side, helping investigators understand what had been taken, rather than helping someone take it. When Vivian left Simone's office, it was past noon. She had approximately 6 hours before Raphael expected her at a dinner with 2 of his business associates and their wives, a performance she was, apparently now required to give regularly as the legitimate missus. Vantrell, she sat in the back of a cab, heading back toward the hotel and looked out at the city and thought about the person she needed to be for the next 6 days. Not a victim. Victims waited for rescue. She had learned a long time ago that rescue was not a reliable strategy, not an avenger. That wasn't it either. Avengers made noise. They burned things down in ways that caught their own fingers. What she needed to be was patient, precise, and absolutely invisible behind the face of a woman who had no idea what was coming. She thought she could manage that. What she had not accounted for was how physically exhausting it would be. The dinner that night was at a private restaurant Raphael used for certain kinds of meetings, the kind where the food was excellent, and the conversation was carefully unremarkable, and everyone at the table understood that the actual business had happened elsewhere, and this was simply the ritual confirmation of it. The other couples were pleasant, in the way that people around Raphael tended to be pleasant, careful, practiced, watching him from corners of their eyes, without appearing to watch him. Vivian ate her salmon and answered questions about the pregnancy, and laughed at the right moments and felt herself performing from some distant internal location, like watching her own body operate from several feet away. Raphael, beside her, was completely at ease. He told a story about a real estate negotiation that made the table laugh. He ordered dessert for her without asking, because he had learned she always wanted the chocolate thing, but felt awkward ordering it. He put his hand on the back of her chair with the proprietary ease of a man who was proud of what he owned. "You're quiet tonight," he said during the car ride back. Not accusatory, observational. "I'm tired," Vivian said. Which was true. The dinner was too long. It was fine. "I'm just third trimester tired. It's different from regular tired." He nodded and reached over and put his hand on hers, and she let him and looked out the window at the city sliding past, and she thought, 5 more days. Day 2, Lenora moved quietly and quickly. The first transfer happened at 11 in the morning on a Wednesday, a sum just significant enough to matter, just small enough to be explainable as ordinary financial management if anyone looked at it in the first 24 hours. Vivian authorized it from her phone in the bathroom of the hotel while Raphael was on a call in the next room. She could hear his voice through the wall, low and even, never raised. Raphael almost never raised his voice. That was one of the more chilling things she had come to understand about him. The authorization went through. Vivian ran cold water over her wrists and looked at herself in the mirror and breathed. Day 3 was harder. Raphael came back to the hotel in the middle of the afternoon, which he didn't usually do, and he was in a different mood than she had seen before. Not angry exactly, but coiled. Something had happened. She didn't ask what, because his wife of 4 days would not necessarily ask what, would wait to be told. And so she sat on the small sofa near the window, with her book open and unread, and let him move around the room. He stood at the window for a long time. Then he said, "Some transactions are being reviewed." Vivian turned a page. "Standard stuff," he said. Whether he was reassuring her or himself, she couldn't tell. "Happens periodically. Nothing to worry about." "Okay," she said. He looked at her. She met his eyes with a completely placid expression that cost her more than anything she had ever done. "Okay," he said, and went back to his phone. She texted Simone from the bathroom. That night, "They're looking at accounts. Does this change the timeline?" Simone responded inside 4 minutes. "Lenora says no. The structures you're using are the legitimate side. The review is almost certainly the other side. Proceed." Day 4. Vivian met Lenora once more, at a coffee shop far enough from anything Raphael adjacent to feel safe. Lenora slid a drive across the table, so smoothly it could have been a sugar packet. "Financial records," Lenora said quietly, not looking at her. "Copies only. Nothing has been removed or altered. These are documents you had access to, through the structures you're legally authorized to use. If anyone ever asks, that's the exact truth." Vivian closed her hand around the drive. "It's significant," Lenora said. "Offshore accounts, domestic shell structures, 3 names that federal investigators have been trying to connect to a pattern for about 18 months. I don't know this because I work for investigators. I know it because I used to work for the other side long enough to learn how things connect. How do I use it? You don't. Not unless you have to. You make sure the right 3 people know it exists and know its protected meaning. If anything happens to you or your ability to communicate freely, it goes somewhere that causes him significant problems." Lenora finally looked at her. "Do you have 3 people you trust outside of his world?" "Simone. My sister. My former professor. Your professor. She's in Rome. She has no connection to anything here. Raphael wouldn't know her name." Vivienne paused. "She also has, based on our last conversation, no particular love of powerful men who treat women as scenery. She sounds perfect." Lenora picked up her coffee, briefed them. "Not the details, just the existence. Just, there are documents. They are protected. Here is the signal that means something has gone wrong." Vivian nodded. "One more thing." Lenora's voice dropped another degree. "Someone in his organization is watching the accounts. Not the legitimate ones that review is probably external. Someone internal has started paying closer attention than usual to the money moving through his infrastructure. I don't know what it means yet, but you need to be ready to move faster than 6 days if it becomes necessary." The drive was warm in Vivian's palm. She put it in her pocket and walked back to the hotel in the thin November light, and she thought about what Lenora had said, and she thought about the fact that Raphael was not the only person with an interest in what was seen inside his empire. And she thought about how many moving pieces there were. In a situation like this, how many things could go wrong, how many variables she couldn't see. Thought about a thing her professor said once in a restoration seminar about the difference between control and stability. You cannot control every variable in a restoration, he had said. The wood moves, the pigment reacts, the environment changes. What you can do is create enough stability that movement doesn't become damage. You don't stop the crack from existing. You stop it from spreading. She thought she understood that better every day. Day 5 was the day she almost broke. Not from what Raphael did, from what he didn't do. He came home early again. He had been doing that more this week. She noticed, which was either coincidence or something shifting in his routines that she couldn't fully read. And he found her on the sofa, and instead of going to his phone or his laptop, he sat down next to her and just stayed there. He asked about the baby's name. They had a short list. He said he liked the name she had suggested first, which was her grandfather's name, and he said it seriously, without performance, and she believed him, and that was the problem. Because it was possible, she had to sit with this. It was possible that Raphael contained both things simultaneously. The man who had been with his mistress on his wedding night and described his marriage as strategic cover, and the man who wanted to give his son his wife's grandfather's name because it mattered to her. People were not simple. She had always known this. But there was a specific pain in discovering that someone you loved was not simply a monster, because monsters were easier. Monsters you left without grief. What she was leaving was more complicated than a monster. She went to bed that night with her back aching and the baby pressing against her ribs, and she stared at the ceiling and she did not cry. But it was close. She thought, I still have to leave. None of the rest of it changes that. The next morning, she called her sister from a payphone she found near a pharmacy 3 blocks from the hotel, which required 10 minutes of searching because payphones barely existed anymore. Her sister answered with immediate alarm because who called from a payphone? And Vivienne said, quickly and quietly, I need you to hold something for me. Contact. A signal. If I send you a specific word, you forward the contact's information to 3 people I'm going to give you. That's all. You don't ask anything. You don't call anyone else first. You just forward it. Her sister was quiet for a long moment. Viv, please. Are you in danger? Not yet. That's not. Please, Vivienne said again. And something in her voice must have landed the right way, because her sister said, okay, what's the word? Restoration. Restoration, her sister repeated. Okay. Vivienne hung up the payphone and stood on the sidewalk in the November cold for a moment, one hand on her belly, and breathed. Day 6. The money was almost fully transferred. Lenora had been systematic and careful, and the numbers Vivienne checked each morning looked exactly as they should. Legitimate financial management, co-signatory exercising established authority, nothing to flag if you were looking at the right side of the ledger. The document copies were secured and distributed to the 3 locations Lenora had recommended. Vivienne felt, for the first time since the wedding night, something that was almost calm. Then Raphael's lieutenant called him. She was in the adjacent room when it happened. She heard Raphael's voice change not to anger, just to a different register, sharper and lower, the voice he used, when something required his complete attention. She could not hear the words. She didn't need to. 20 minutes later, Raphael appeared in the doorway. I need to go to Philadelphia tomorrow morning, he said. Okay, Vivienne said. She was sorting through baby clothes someone had sent as a gift, which gave her hands something to do. Business, I figured. She held up a tiny yellow onesie and examined it as though it required serious consideration. I'll be back by Friday. He paused. I'll call when I land. Okay. She set the onesie down. She looked at him with the warm, mildly distracted expression of a woman who loved him and trusted him and had no reason to think about anything other than small yellow onesies. Travel safe. He kissed her forehead. He looked at her for a moment with something she couldn't read in his face. Then he went back to his phone. That night, after Raphael slept, he slept deeply and quickly. A survival skills? She suspected Vivienne lay awake and did the final accounting. Tomorrow was the day. Not because the plan was fully ready, because the clock had run out. Because she had spent the last hour reviewing the information Lenora had passed her on day 4, cross-referencing it against the account access she still had, and she had found something Lenora had not flagged, because Lenora had not seen it yet. A secondary alert structure buried in one of the investment vehicles. It was not a tripwire exactly. It was more like a proximity alarm, automated, built to flag significant movement patterns and send a notification to a specific internal address. She had triggered it, not the whole thing, not the full alert, but she had come close enough that the system had logged the approach. And if anyone was watching that log, and someone in Raphael's organization had been watching accounts more closely than usual, they might look at it within the next 48 hours. She had 48 hours, maybe less. And Raphael was going to Philadelphia tomorrow, which was she had known for 3 days, without being able to prove it, not Philadelphia. She had let herself know that without fully sitting with it. Now she sat with it. He was going to Celeste. He had said his business emergency went all night on their wedding night. He had said his meetings in Philadelphia would keep him until Friday. He would come back from this trip the same way he had come back, on the first morning, showered, calm, practiced in his tenderness, kissing her forehead with the mouth that had been on someone else. And she would be here, waiting, if she stayed. She thought about the woman she had been 12 hours after the wedding, sitting in that enormous bed in her wedding dress, reading messages that remade the entire architecture of her life, deciding in that cold, quiet space to be patient rather than reactive. She had been patient. She had been precise. She had done everything right. Now it was time to stop waiting. She lay in the dark and listened to Raphael breathe, and thought about Florence, the light there in November, which was a particular kind of gray gold that she had loved when she was 23 and studying, and had no idea what her life would become. She thought about the studio she had contacted quietly 4 days ago through a former classmate who didn't know why she was asking. She thought about the small apartment her classmate had found modest, nothing like what she had now, a bed and a desk, and 2 windows and a kitchen where she could make tea in the morning. She thought about her son, who she had not named yet, who was going to be born somewhere she chose, on her own terms. She closed her eyes. She did not sleep. At 5:40 in the morning, Raphael's alarm went off. He showered. He dressed in the dark so as not to wake her. He came to the bed and bent down and kissed her belly. She felt it, kept her breathing even and slow. A woman sleeping, and then she heard him cross the room, pick up his bag, open the door. Pause. She held completely still. The door closed. She lay in the silence for exactly 60 seconds, counting. Then she sat up, swung her legs off the bed, and moved to the window. She watched the street below until she saw the black car pull away from the hotel entrance, watched it until it turned the corner and disappeared. She went to the closet. She had packed a bag 4 days ago, small, essential, the kind of bag a pregnant woman could carry for 30 minutes, if she had to, and she'd hidden it inside a garment bag at the back of the closet, where Raphael never looked, because it contained clothes he'd never seen her wear, things she'd bought in cash from a consignment shop, 3 blocks from Simone's office. She pulled the bag out. She sat on the edge of the bed and looked at the room. She looked at the wedding ring on her left hand. She held it there for a moment, looking at it in the early morning light, and then she took it off. Her finger felt immediately different, strange and light and oddly free. She reached for the nightstand and picked up the ultrasound photograph, the one from the 28-week appointment, the clearest one, the one where you could see his profile so clearly that she had cried in the car afterward. She placed the ring beside the photograph, carefully, centered. She picked up the hotel notepad and the pen. She thought for a long time about what to write. She had rehearsed this moment in her head several times in the last 6 days. She had composed long paragraphs in her head, careful, precise, articulate statements of everything she had learned, and everything she felt, and everything she intended. She wrote 4 words. I know. Good luck. She placed the note beneath the ring so it would stay flat. She picked up her bag. She was almost at the door when the phone on the nightstand lit up not her phone, the hotel phone, which almost never rang. And she stopped and looked at it, and her heart did something it had not done in 6 days. It faltered. It rang 3 times. She did not answer it. But in that moment, standing at the door of a room she was leaving forever, bag in hand, one hand instinctively over her belly, watching a phone ring in a room she was choosing to walk out of, she felt the full weight of what she was doing press down on her at once. The enormity of it. The irreversibility. She thought, there is no version of leaving quietly that is also leaving safely. One of those things has to give. The phone stopped ringing. She opened the door and walked out. In the elevator on the way down to the lobby, she destroyed her phone the way Lenora had shown her a specific thing with the SIM that took 11 seconds and dropped the components in the bottom of her bag to be disposed of separately. She walked through the hotel lobby at the speed of a woman who was not in a hurry, because people who were in a hurry got remembered. She smiled at the front desk clerk, who smiled back with the automatic warmth of someone who didn't know what she was looking at. She walked out of the hotel. The November air hit her face, and she breathed it in, deep and cold and real. She turned left. She had 17 minutes to reach the car Simone had arranged. At the address Simone had texted 3 days ago to an email account Raphael had never seen on a phone that no longer existed. She walked. Behind her, in a room on the 14th floor of a Boston hotel, a wedding ring sat beside an ultrasound photograph, beside 4 words on a notepad, waiting for a man who was not in Philadelphia to come home and understand what he had finally irreversibly lost. And somewhere inside Raphael's organization, a log file that had been ticking quietly for 6 days finally crossed a threshold and sent an automatic notification to an internal address that someone, somewhere, was already watching. The hunt had begun, and Vivian Hartwell had a 17-minute head start. 17 minutes felt like nothing and everything at the same time. Vivian walked at the pace she had practiced, not slow, not urgent, the specific rhythm of a pregnant woman with somewhere reasonable to be. Her bag pulled at her shoulder. The November air was cold enough to see her breath, and she watched it disappear in front of her face with each exhale, and thought about nothing except the next block, and the block after that, and the address Simone had sent to the email account that did not exist anymore. The car was a gray Honda Civic, 8 years old, nothing memorable about it. The woman driving it was someone Simone had described only as reliable and was paid in cash and would ask no questions. Vivian had not asked for more information than that because more information created more threads, and threads were how people got found. She got in the back seat. "Drive normally," she said. The woman nodded and pulled into traffic and drove normally. Vivian sat with her bag on her lap and watched the city she had lived in for 6 years move past Point Window, and told herself she was not going to feel it yet. The feeling was there, a pressure behind her sternum, somewhere between grief and relief, and something she didn't have a name for, but she put it in a box and set the box aside and thought about logistics. New phone. Simone had one waiting. Different transportation out of Boston than the original plan. She had changed it twice in the last 48 hours, and the version Lenora knew was not the version she was actually using. Not from any distrust of Lenora, but because compartmentalization was the only discipline that mattered now. Car stopped at a red light. Vivian looked out the window and saw a woman pushing a stroller on the sidewalk, a toddler bundled into what appeared to be a small orange parka, the woman leaning into the handle with the particular exhaustion of early parenthood. The toddler was pointing at something, a pigeon, probably, or a puddle, the two things that reliably captivated toddlers, and the woman looked down with a tired smile that was still, despite the exhaustion, completely real. Vivian looked away. The light changed. Simone was waiting at the second location, a law office 3 miles from the hotel that Simone used for certain clients who required discretion. Vivienne came through the side entrance and found Simone standing in the hallway with a phone in one hand and an expression that meant something had already happened. "Talk to me," Vivienne said. The log alert. Simone handed her the phone. "Lenora's been monitoring it. It triggered 40 minutes ago." Someone in his organization pulled the notification. Vivian looked at the screen. The timestamp on the alert was 6:04 a.m., 9 minutes after she had walked out of the hotel. Do they know it was me? They know the movement came from your authorized access structures. Whether they connect that to you specifically depends on how much they've been watching and how fast they move. How fast can they move? Lenora says within 4 hours they could have a complete picture if they have someone who knows what they're looking at. 4 hours. Vivienne had planned for this as an abstract possibility. Now it was a specific number, and 4 hours was not enough time. To be out of the country, her original plan had assumed a 12-hour buffer before anyone put the full picture together. "I need to change the route," she said. "Already working on it." Simone pulled out a second phone, a burner, the kind you bought at a pharmacy with cash, and handed it to her. New number. Only I have it. Lenora has a different one. Keep them separate. Vivian took the phone. The documents, she said. Distributed. All 3 locations confirmed receipt in the last 2 hours. Anything happens to you or your ability to communicate freely, the protocol activates automatically. My sister? She got the signal word confirmed. Vivienne nodded. She stood in the hallway of a law office in downtown Boston at 6:20 in the morning, 32 weeks pregnant, carrying a bag with everything she was taking out of her old life, and she thought with absolute clarity, this is where the plan ends and improvisation begins. What are my options? Simone had them ready. She had been up all night. Vivienne could see it in her face, the specific blurred quality around the eyes. The way her movements were slightly more deliberate than usual, someone operating on caffeine and urgency. She laid out 3 routes. The first was the original 2 exposed now. The second was faster, but required a connection through New York that added a 4-hour window of vulnerability. The third was the one Simone clearly thought was the right choice, but had been reluctant to suggest, which was visible in the slight hesitation before she described it. Private car to Providence. Charter flight from a small airfield. Rome, not Florence directly. We get you to Rome, and your professor meets you there. From Rome you go to Florence by train. The name on the charter is not your name. It's the name on the secondary ID Lenora set up. The secondary ID, Vivian said carefully. It's completely clean. Nothing tied to Vantrell, nothing tied to Hartwell. Fresh. Simone met her eyes. No, you said you wanted everything clean. This is clean. It's just clean in a way that requires you to use a name that isn't yours for about 18 hours. Vivian thought about this for exactly 4 seconds. How long until the car to Providence? 20 minutes. Booked the charter. She used those 20 minutes to change clothes in the bathroom, the clothes from the consignment shop, nothing that could be tied to anything Raphael had ever seen her wear, and to call her sister from the burner phone. Her sister answered in 2 rings, voice rough with early morning. It's me, Vivian said. Don't say my name, just listen. Pause. Then okay. I'm leaving today. I'll be where I'm going by tomorrow. I'll contact you when I'm safe. If you don't hear from me in 48 hours, use the word. Another pause longer. Viv, don't. I'm scared for you. I know. Vivian pressed her hand flat against the tile wall of the bathroom. I'm scared too. But I'm also, she stopped. She hadn't expected to say that out loud. She hadn't expected to say the next part either. I'm also the most clear-headed I've been in 2 years. Isn't that something? Her sister made a sound that was half law, half something worse. You call me the minute you land. I will. She hung up. She looked at herself in the bathroom mirror one more time. The woman looking back at her was not the woman in the wedding dress who had stared at her reflection at 3 in the morning 6 days ago. She wasn't sure yet who this woman was. She thought she might need some time to find out. The car to Providence left at 6:50. The driver was the same woman from the Honda Civic, which Vivienne had not expected, and which meant Simone trusted her for the longer leg, which was good enough. They drove in silence through the early morning city, the streets still half empty, the light coming up gray and low over the rooftops. Vivienne's watched Boston recede through the back window and felt something she couldn't fully name, not relief, not yet. Not while she was still inside the 4-hour window, but something adjacent to it. The specific feeling of a thing that cannot be undone. She was 45 minutes outside Boston when the burner phone rang. She looked at the screen. Simone. What happened? Vivienne said. Not a question. They moved faster than 4 hours. Simone's voice was controlled but tight. Someone in his organization pulled CCTV from the hotel lobby. Vivienne's hand tightened on the phone. When? Within the last 30 minutes. Lenora has a source. Don't ask who flagged it. They have footage of you leaving. They have a timestamp. They know you weren't there when the notification triggered, which means they know it wasn't a system error or an accidental access. They know it was intentional. The car kept moving. The driver's eyes stayed on the road. Do they know where I'm going? Not yet, but they'll pull your phone records. My phone is gone. Your old phone. The one you used before. They'll pull call records, location history. They'll build a map of everywhere you've been in the last 7 days. Vivian thought about the coffee shop where she had met Lenora. The payphone. Simone's office. Simone. Does Simone's office show up? A half-second pause that told her everything. I was careful, Simone said. I've already moved anything sensitive off-site. If they come to the office, there's nothing there that points forward. But it points to you. I'm an attorney. I have client confidentiality and a building full of lawyers who explaining that to people. A beat. Vivian, listen to me. The charter flight is your window. Once you're in the air, they can't follow the thread in real time. By the time they figure out the route, you'll be in Rome. Or they intercept me before I get to the airfield. There are 11 private airfields within driving distance of Providence. Lenora booked one of them. I know whichest one. The driver knows which one. Nobody else does. Vivian looked at the road ahead. Fields now, the city behind them, the landscape flattening into the particular nowhere of highway travel. Okay, she said. Okay, Simone said. Call me when you're in the air. She hung up. Vivian sat with the phone in her lap and breathed with slow, deliberate control, the same breathing she'd used in labor preparation classes, which she had attended alone, because Raphael had been unable to make the session. Dates fit his schedule, which she now understood meant he had been with Celeste, and she thought about the variables she couldn't see. Raphael was the variable she couldn't see. He was in not Philadelphia. He did not know yet. He would find out when he found his phone, when someone in his organization reached him, and she did not know when that would happen or what he would do when it did. She had spent 6 days being certain. She understood Raphael well enough to predict his response. She had built her entire plan around a specific theory of his character, that Raphael was rational, that his decisions were strategic rather than emotional, and that a man who had built an empire on calculated moves would respond to her departure with calculation rather than rage. She had forgotten one thing. She had never seen him lose something before. The airfield was small enough to be unremarkable and large enough to have a functional charter operation. The driver pulled through a gate and parked near a low building, and Vivienne got out and stood in the cold with her bag and looked at the small plane on the tarmac and thought about everything she was leaving in the air behind her. The check-in process took 8 minutes. The name on the documents was not her name. She answered questions in the calm, clear voice of a woman who traveled this way routinely, and she did not let her hands shake until she was alone in the small bathroom of the aircraft, and then she let them shake for 30 seconds, and then she stopped. The plane took off at 9:47 in the morning. She watched Massachusetts disappear beneath the clouds. She thought, I did it. I actually did it. That thought lasted approximately 4 minutes. At 9:51, the pilot came back from the cockpit with an expression that a careful person would have recognized immediately as the expression of someone delivering news they would prefer not to deliver. Ma'am, he said, I've just received a communication from the airfield. There are individuals who have arrived asking about a passenger on this flight. Vivian went completely still. We are already in the air, the pilot said carefully. I am not required to return for a ground inquiry. However, I am required to inform you that the inquiry was made, and to ask whether you would like me to contact. No, Vivian said, don't contact anyone. Keep flying. Yes, ma'am. He went back to the cockpit. Vivian sat in the leather seat of the charter plane at 30,000 feet and understood that she had cleared the first wall, and the second wall had already been there waiting. They had found the airfield. Not the plane, they hadn't stopped the plane, which meant they were either unwilling to escalate to that level yet, or they hadn't been able to move fast enough. But they had found the airfield, which meant they had narrowed 11 locations to one in under 3 hours, which meant someone inside her plan had given them information she had believed was compartmentalized. She sat with that. The drone of the engines filled the small cabin. She sat with it fully. Someone had talked. Not Simone, she dismissed that immediately. Not from sentiment, but from logic. Simone had built her entire career on discretion. The risk calculation didn't work. Not her sister. Her sister didn't know the airfield existed, which left the driver, or Lenora. She pulled out the burner phone and called Simone. Simone picked up in one ring. You're in the air. They found the airfield, Vivian said flatly. Silence. They were there when we took off. They didn't intercept, but they found it in under 3 hours. Vivian kept her voice level. Someone gave them something, Simone. I need to know who. I don't, Simone stopped. Give me 10 minutes. I have 8 hours of flight. She hung up. She sat in the silence of the plane and watched the clouds below and thought about what it meant. If the driver had talked, it was over. The driver knew Providence, knew the airfield, might know more depending on what she had heard in the car. If Lenora had talked, Vivian did not let herself finish that thought. Not yet, because Lenora had the financial records. Lenora knew which 3 locations held the document copies. Lenora was the architecture of the protection Vivienne had built around herself. If Lenora had talked, then the protection was not protection. It was a map back to her. 30 minutes later, Simone called. "The driver," Simone said. The word landed like something dropped from a height. "She was approached before you got in the car. Someone who knew, I don't know how that a car had been arranged. She was offered money. She took it, and also completed the job, which is why you're in the air. She told them the airfield, but not the flight details. How do you know she didn't tell them the flight details? Because you'd have been stopped on the ground." This was true. "Is Lenora clean?" Vivienne asked. A pause that lasted precisely long enough to mean something, as far as I can tell. "That's not the same as yes." "No," Simone said quietly. "It isn't." Vivienne pressed 2 fingers against her temple and looked out the small window at the clouds and thought about the document copies. The 3 locations. The protocol her sister would activate if Vivienne sent the word or failed to contact her in 48 hours. She thought about the fact that Raphael's organization had found the airfield in 3 hours. She thought about the fact that they had not stopped the plane. That was the part she kept returning to. They had found her. They had arrived at the airfield while she was still there, technically, still accessible. And they had not stopped her. That was not the behavior of an organization trying to retrieve an asset. That was the behavior of an organization that wanted to know where the asset was going. "Simone," she said slowly, "they're not trying to stop me." Beat. "What?" "They let the plane go. They had the location, they had the time window, they didn't move to intercept. They're tracking. They want to know where I land." The silence on the line had a different quality now. "If that's true," Simone said carefully, "then someone on the other end is going to be watching for you. In Rome." In Rome, Vivienne looked at the clouds. She thought about everything she had put in place. Protocol, the documents, the carefully structured deterrence she had spent 6 days building. And she thought about the fact that a deterrence only worked if the other person believed it would be activated, and the only person who could activate it was her. If Raphael's organization knew where she was going and had people there when she landed, then the deterrence was neutralized. You could not threaten a man with consequences if his people had already controlled the situation before the consequences could be deployed. She had built an exit. What she had not fully built was a contingency for the exit being compromised. She had 47 minutes of phone battery left, and 8 hours of flight and a destination that was potentially already known to people who were not friendly. She thought about the painting, the crack in the panel that her professor had called information. She opened the burner phone and called a number she had memorized 3 days ago and used only once to confirm it was active. It rang 4 times. Then a woman's voice, roughened by age and cigarettes, and what Vivienne knew from 6 years of correspondence was a comprehensive impatience with the unnecessary. "Who is this?" "It's Vivienne Hartwell," she said. "I'm landing in Rome in 8 hours. I cannot land where I said I was going to land. I need an alternative arrival point, and I need someone to meet me who is not connected to anything I've mentioned to anyone in the last 7 days." A breath. "I'm sorry to call like this. I didn't have another option." A long pause. Professor Adele Mancini, 71 years old, master conservator, former chair of the restoration faculty at the institute where Vivienne had spent 2 of the best years of her adult life, said, "Are you safe right now?" "Right now, yes." "The baby?" "The baby is fine." Another pause. Shorter this time. "I have a colleague in Fiumicino. Private hangar. No commercial terminal. Can your pilot divert?" "I'll find out. Call me back in 10 minutes." Vivienne went to the cockpit and explained the situation in the cleanest possible terms, a concern about arrival location, a private alternative, a colleague who could arrange access. Pilot was a professional in the way that certain people in certain industries were professional, which meant he understood that his client's reasons were not always his business. And he made 2 calls and came back with Cincinnati in 6 minutes. Fiumicino private. I can file the amended flight plan now. It'll show as a routine diversion weather advisory. Do it, Vivienne said. She called Adele back. Done, Adele said. My colleague will have a car. No one will know you landed. Professor, Vivienne said, there's something I need to tell you about why I'm asking. I gathered it was significant. It's more than significant. Vivienne pressed her back against the wall of the small cabin and looked at the floor and said the next part quietly and completely. I have financial records connected to a criminal organization. I distributed copies to 3 locations as a deterrent. I'm not certain all 3 locations are secure anymore. If the deterrence fails, if I'm stopped, before I can reach safety, there's a protocol. But someone needs to know the full picture in case the protocol needs to be activated manually. Adele was quiet for a long moment. Tell me, she said finally. Vivienne told her. All of it. The tablet, the messages, the plan, Lenora, the documents, the 3 locations, the driver, the airfield, the plane that had been allowed to leave. She spoke quietly and steadily for 20 minutes, and when she finished, there was a silence on the line that felt very different from ignorance. Vivienne, Adele said, yes. When you were 23 and you restored that portrait panel in my seminar, the one with the crack through the support, do you remember what I told you? Vivienne closed her eyes. You said the crack was information. And do you remember what else I said? She thought. You said, don't let the damage convince you. The painting is ruined. Damage and ruin are not the same thing. That's right. A breath. You are not ruined, Vivienne. You are damaged. There's a difference. A pause. Now, when you land, there will be a blue car, a Fiat, old, ugly. My colleague drives it. His name is Marco. He will take you to my apartment in Trastevere. I will be there, and then we will figure out the next part together. Vivienne stood in the narrow corridor of the charter plane, 8 hours from Italy, 32 weeks pregnant, carrying a bag with everything she owned that mattered, and she held the phone against her ear and breathed. Thank you, she said. Don't thank me yet, Adele said. Land first. She hung up. Vivienne went back to her seat. She put the phone in her bag. She put both hands on her belly and sat very still, and listened to the engines, and thought about what was waiting for her, not in Rome, not in Florence, but on the other side of all of this, in some future she could not yet see clearly, but was beginning to believe might actually exist. She was still thinking about it when the second burner phone, the one she'd kept separate, the one only Lenora had the number for, buzzed once, with a text message. She had forgotten she was carrying it. She looked at the screen. The message was 4 words and a number. They know about Florence. And below it, a set of coordinates that were not Rome and not Florence, and a single instruction, go here instead. Trust no one you told. She stared at the message. She looked at the sender. The number was Lenora's. But the phrasing trust no one you told meant something that landed in her chest like a fist. Because Lenora was one of the people she had told. Which meant either Lenora was warning her about the other 2, or Lenora was the one who had told them. And this message was something else entirely, not a warning, but a redirect, pulling her away from the plan Simone and Adele had just confirmed, away from the blue Fiat and the old apartment in Trastevere, and the one person in this entire situation she had not chosen, but had been given by circumstance and had decided, in the last 20 minutes, to trust completely. The engines droned. The clouds moved below. Vivienne Hartwell held the phone in both hands and understood that she had arrived at the moment where every decision she made in the next 30 seconds would determine whether the last 6 days had saved her or simply delayed what was coming, and she had no information she fully trusted and no person she could call who was not already part of the problem. And the baby moved inside her, a slow roll, not a kick, the kind of movement that felt almost like the baby moved inside her, a slow roll, not a kick, the kind of movement that felt almost like a question, and Vivienne looked at the phone in her hands and made a decision in 4 seconds that she would spend years thinking about afterward. She deleted the message. Not because she had decided to ignore it, because she needed it gone from the device before she decided anything else. If the message was a redirect, a trap, then having it on the phone was a liability. If it was a genuine warning, she had already read it, and the information lived in her head now, which was the only place she fully controlled. She deleted it and put the phone in the outer pocket of her bag. Then she sat back in the leather seat and pressed both palms flat against her thighs and thought with everything she had. Lenora Pierce had built the architecture of this escape. Every financial structure, every transfer, every document copy and distribution location had passed through Lenora's hands and Lenora's knowledge. If Lenora was compromised, if Lenora had been reached by Raphael's organization at any point in the last 6 days, then the protection Vivienne had built was not protection. It was a detailed map of exactly where she was going and exactly what she was carrying. But if Lenora was clean and the message was genuine, then someone else had compromised the plan, the driver, someone at one of the 3 document locations, someone whose name Vivienne had never heard, and Lenora was the only person trying to warn her. 2 possibilities. No way to verify either one at 30,000 feet with a dying phone battery and 8 hours of ocean between her and the ground. Pulled out the primary burner Simone's phone and called. Simone answered immediately. "Talk." "Lenora," Vivienne said. "I need you to look at her. Right now. Not tomorrow. Not in an hour." Now a pause. "What happened?" "I got a message from her number. It said they know about Florence and told me to go somewhere else instead. It also said, trust no one I told." The silence lasted 4 seconds. "I'm on it." "Simone." Vivienne's voice dropped. "If she's dirty, the document locations are compromised. All 3. I know. Which means the deterrence is gone." "I know, Vivienne." "Which means there is nothing between me and whatever Raphael decides to do." "Give me 30 minutes, Simone said. And she hung up. Vivienne put the phone down on the seat beside her. She sat in the thin, recycled air of the charter cabin and thought about the specific quality of helplessness. She was feeling not the helplessness of someone who had no options, but the particular agony of someone who had built options carefully and was now watching them potentially dissolve, one by one, while sitting in a metal tube over the Atlantic, with no ability to act on anything for the next several hours. She got up. She walked to the small galley at the back of the plane and found a bottle of water and drank half of it, standing up. She pressed her forehead against the cool interior wall of the aircraft for a moment. The vibration of the engines moved through the wall into her skull. She thought about Raphael. Not the Raphael of the last 6 days, the target, the adversary, the variable she was calculating against. The Raphael she had known before the tablet, before the messages. The Raphael who had appeared at the opening of a small restoration exhibition 2.5 years ago, which he had attended because one of his associates had a piece in it, and who had stood in front of a 16th century portrait. Vivienne had spent 4 months restoring and said, without preamble, "How do you know when you're done?" She had looked at him, expensive suit, the kind of face that had probably gotten him through situations that should have killed him, and eyes that were actually looking at the painting rather than performing appreciation. And she had said, when you've stabilized it, when the damage is documented and contained and the work can survive without you intervening anymore. He had looked at her then instead of the painting. "That sounds like letting go," he'd said. "It is," she'd said. "The best restoration work is knowing when to stop." She had thought about that conversation many times in the last 6 days. She had thought it was a memory she was keeping, because it represented what she had lost. The version of Raphael she had believed was real. Standing in the galley of a charter plane over the Atlantic, she thought something different. She thought he had asked the right question. He simply had never been able to answer it for himself. The primary burner rang at 11 minutes, not 30. "Lenora is clean," Simone said. "No preamble. You're certain." "As certain as I can be. I called in 2 favors. She's been in her office since 5 this morning. Her phone records show nothing unusual, and the source she used to flag the CCTV pull at the hotel is someone I can independently verify." A breath. "The message is real, Vivienne. Someone talked, and it wasn't Lenora." "Then who?" "I've been looking at the 3 document locations. The third one, the attorney in Providence, he has a connection to a real estate firm that has a connection to a holding company that Lenora's source tied to one of Raphael's associate networks. It's indirect. 3 degrees. But it's there. 3 degrees was close enough. So they have the documents," Vivienne said. "Copies. And they knew you were heading to Florence. Which means they'll have people there." Vivienne was already thinking. But they might not know about Rome. And they definitely don't know about Adele or the Fiumicino diversion, because I only made that call an hour ago. "Is the diversion filed?" "Yes. It'll show as a weather advisory. Then you have a window." Simone's voice had the quality it got when she was working a problem tighter, faster, each word chosen. "Get to Adele. From there, do not tell me where you go next. Don't tell Lenora. Don't tell anyone. You go dark from the moment you land, and you surface when you're somewhere they haven't been told to look. Vivienne understood what Simone was saying. She was saying, from this point forward, you are alone. What about the deterrence? Vivienne asked. If the third location is compromised, the first and second still hold. That's not zero. A pause. It's also not what it was. No, it wasn't, Simone Vivienne said. If Raphael's people find me before I find ground, they won't, if they do. You know what to do. A silence that held everything they had not said to each other in 30 years of friendship. I know what to do, Simone said quietly. Tell my sister I love her. Tell her yourself. You're landing in 6 hours. Simone's voice didn't waver. Go dark. Move fast. Call me from the other side. She hung up. Vivienne stood in the galley with the dead phone in her hand and listened to the engines and thought, 6 hours. 6 hours was a long time to think and a short time to prepare. She used the first 2 hours to do something she had not allowed herself to do since the wedding night. She slept. Not deeply the baby's position, and the seat and the low-grade hum of crisis all conspired against depth, but she slept in the fragmented, useful way she had learned during the pregnancy, where you took 20 minutes when you could get them, and your body sorted itself out. She woke with 2 hours to landing, and her back aching from the seat, and a clarity she hadn't expected. She knew what she had to do at Fiumicino. She knew what she had to do after. What she didn't know was whether Raphael would let any of it happen. Because somewhere between Boston and the Atlantic, the thing she had managed not to think about fully had become impossible to avoid. Raphael knew. By now 8 hours after she had walked out of that hotel, with his organization already watching accounts and pulling CCTV footage before she had even reached the charter, Raphael knew. He had landed in not Philadelphia, or not landed, and his phone had blown up. And he had stood somewhere with his phone in his hand and read the summary of what had happened and understood. His wife had left him. His pregnant wife had left him having spent 6 days systematically dismantling his financial control over her, copying his records, building a protection structure, and then walking out with 4 words on a notepad. She had spent 6 days in a hotel room, with him sleeping beside him, eating breakfast across from him, letting him put his hand on her belly while she was doing all of it. She thought about what that would do to a man like Raphael, not the fury. She had accounted for fury. Fury was manageable because fury was reactive, and reactive people made predictable moves. What she had not fully accounted for was something worse than fury. She had not accounted for the particular devastation of a man who had controlled everything for 20 years, suddenly understanding that he had been completely fooled, and by someone he had underestimated completely. That was not fury. That was something closer to collapse. And collapse in a man like Raphael could go 2 ways. It could go quiet, the cold, methodical reassertion of control, everything tightened and reorganized and directed. Or it could go the other way, the way she had never seen in 2.5 years, because he had never lost anything before volatile, impulsive, stripped of the calculation that made him dangerous in a manageable direction. She did not know which way it would go. That was the thing that made her hands unsteady in the last hour of the flight. Not fear of what Raphael would do. Fear of not knowing which Raphael she was dealing with anymore. Fiumicino Private Terminal was small and quiet and smelled of jet fuel and damp concrete. Marco was exactly as Adela described, old, rumpled, driving a Fiat that had dents in 2 panels and an air freshener shaped like a pine tree that had long since stopped smelling like anything. He did not ask questions. He drove. Vivienne sat in the back seat and watched Rome materialize around her, the particular density of it, the way the ancient and the modern pressed against each other without apology. And she felt something shift inside her that was not relief yet, but was the first thing that had felt, in days, like ground. Adele's apartment in Trastevere was on the 3rd floor of a building that had been old when the Renaissance was young. The elevator was broken, which was not ideal at 32 weeks, and Vivienne climbed the stairs slowly with Marco carrying her bag and arrived at the top, breathing harder than she wanted to admit. The door opened before she knocked. Adele Mancini was 71 and looked 60 and moved like 50, with the physical economy of someone who had spent 50 years working with her hands and her eyes in close, demanding spaces. She looked at Vivienne, really looked. The way a conservator looked at a damaged work, assessing, and then she stepped back and said simply, "Come in." The apartment was exactly what Vivienne had imagined from their correspondence over 6 years, crowded with books and tools and small beautiful things, arranged with the casual precision of someone who understood aesthetics so thoroughly. They didn't have to think about it anymore. It smelled like linseed oil and old paper and coffee. Vivienne sat down on a sofa and Adele brought her tea and sat across from her and said, "Tell me what's changed since we spoke." Vivienne told her. Adele listened. She did not interrupt. When Vivienne finished, Adele was quiet for a moment, then said, "The third location, the attorney in Providence." "Yes." "So they have copies of the documents?" "Yes." "And they knew about Florence before you changed your route?" "Yes." Adele set down her coffee cup with deliberate care. "Then we have two problems. The first is your immediate safety where you go from here, and how you get there without them knowing. The second is the deterrence." She looked at Vivienne steadily. "You built the deterrence on 3 locations. One is gone. The other 2 still hold, but a deterrence that is 2/3 of what it was is not the same deterrence. He will know that." "He will know that," Vivienne agreed. "So we rebuild it." Adele said this, the way she might say we reground the pigment, practical, immediate, already thinking about the next step. "You have originals, encrypted. On a drive I carried out myself. Then we make new copies. News locations. Locations he has no thread to, because they go through me and no one who connects to your previous network." She paused. "I have 3 colleagues in 3 different countries who owe me professional debts of the kind that don't expire. They are not attorneys. They are not financial people. They are conservators who work with fragile and valuable things and understand that discretion is not a preference. It is a professional requirement." Vivienne looked at her. "You thought of this already," Vivienne said. "I thought of it during the phone call," Adele said. "I am old, not slow." For the first time in 6 days, the first time since she had sat on the edge of the hotel bed and read messages on her husband's tablet, Vivienne felt something crack open in her chest that was not grief and not fear. She pressed her lips together hard and looked at the ceiling of Adele's apartment and breathed through it until it was manageable. "I'm sorry," she said. You are 32 weeks pregnant, and you have been carrying this alone for 6 days," Adele said, without particular softness, but with the kind of accuracy that functioned as its own form of comfort. "You don't need to apologize for having a human moment." Vivienne nodded. She pressed her hands flat on her thighs. She breathed. "We have a few hours before anything urgent needs to happen," Adele said. "I want you to sleep. I will begin making calls. I need to." "You need to sleep," Adele said, with the authority of a woman who had managed graduate students for 35 years and was not interested in argument. "The baby needs you to sleep. Whatever decisions come next will be made better by someone who has slept." Vivienne slept. She woke 4 hours later to the smell of something being cooked, something with garlic and tomatoes. Simple and warm, and to the sound of Adele on the phone in the kitchen, speaking Italian in a low, rapid voice that she could not follow completely from the other room. She lay still for a moment and listened to the sounds of the apartment and felt the baby move and thought, "I am in Rome. I am not in Boston. I am not in that hotel room. I am here." It was enough. For right now, it was enough. She got up and went to the kitchen doorway. Adele looked up from the phone and held up 2 fingers 2 minutes and kept talking. Vivienne poured herself a glass of water and stood at the kitchen window and looked down at the narrow Trastevere street below. A man was arguing with someone on a moped. 2 women were talking outside a bakery. A cat was sitting on a window ledge 2 buildings over, completely indifferent to everything. The ordinary, gorgeous noise of a city with no idea what was happening in this apartment. Adele hung up. 3 locations confirmed: Naples, Berlin, and a colleague in Lisbon who was my student 38 years ago and has never failed me once. She moved to the stove and stirred the sauce. The drive? Vivienne pulled it from her bag. After dinner, Adele said, "You eat first." They ate at a small table near the window, and Vivienne ate more than she expected to, because she realized she had eaten almost nothing in the last 20 hours, and her body was done being patient about it. They did not talk about Raphael. They talked about the studio. In Florence, Adele had already made inquiries. A friend of a friend who had space and was looking for a conservator with Vivienne's specific background, and about the apartment situation, and about what the first months would look like with a newborn and a new career in a city she had not lived in for 6 years. It was the most ordinary conversation Vivienne had had in what felt like years. After dinner, they copied the drive. Adele packaged the copies with the same methodical care she brought to everything and left the apartment to deliver the first one. Personally, a colleague 5 minutes away. Apparently, while Vivienne sat on the sofa and held the original drive and thought about the next 24 hours, which was when her second burner phone rang. The Lenora phone, the one she had kept separate. She looked at the screen for 2 full seconds before she answered. "I've been trying to reach you for 4 hours," Lenora said. Not frantic, controlled, but with an edge Vivienne had not heard in her voice before. "I went dark," Vivienne said. "I know, I figured that's what the silence meant." A pause. "Are you safe?" "For now." "Good." A breath. "I need to tell you something, and I need you to listen without reacting until I'm done." Vivienne sat up straighter. "I'm listening." "Raphael is not the primary threat right now." Lenora's voice was precise and steady. "He is a threat, yes. But there is someone inside his organization who has been using your departure and the exposure of the financial records as the beginning of a move against him. Not against you, against him. Someone who saw the financial disruption you caused and decided it was a window." Vivienne was quiet. "His name is Dario Russo," Lenora said. "He's been Raphael's second for 11 years. He's been positioning for longer than that. The account monitoring the internal watching that I told you about early on, that wasn't Raphael's people being suspicious of you. That was Russo's people. Russo knew about the financial structures. He's been waiting for an opportunity to destabilize Raphael's control over the money, and you handed him a reason to move faster than he'd planned." The implications settled into Vivienne's mind one by one. "He's the one who got to the Providence attorney," she said. "Yes, and the driver. He's been running a parallel operation, watching everything you did, and instead of stopping it, instead of telling Raphael immediately, he let it run. He let you take the money and copy the records because every action you took created more justification for the move he's been planning. He used me. He used the situation. It's slightly different." A pause. "Point is, Vivienne, Raphael's organization right now is not a unified thing moving toward you. It's a fractured thing. 2 factions. And the faction that is trying to find you is not necessarily the faction that has the most resources at this exact moment. Which faction sent people to Florence? Russo's. Vivienne processed this. Why would Russo want to find me? Because you have the records, Lenora said. The financial records you copied. They incriminate Raphael, yes. But they also incriminate Russo. Some of the transactions in those documents have Russo's fingerprints on them, arrangements he made on Raphael's behalf that Raphael may or may not have fully authorized. If those records reach investigators, Russo goes down alongside Raphael. So he's not trying to retrieve me for Raphael," Vivienne said slowly. "He's trying to retrieve the records. He's trying to retrieve the records and eliminate the person carrying them." Lenora's voice was flat. "I'm sorry to say that plainly, but you needed to know." The room was very quiet. Vivienne held the phone against her ear and felt the baby move and looked at the wall of Adele's apartment with its rows of books and small, careful things, and thought about what Lenora had just said. "Eliminate. Where is Raphael?" she asked. "Boston. He came back from wherever he was when his organization started alerting. He's been in a meeting with his senior people for the last 3 hours. According to my source, the meeting has been a pause. The sound of paper moving, heated, is the word used. Does he know about Russo? I believe he suspects. He doesn't have proof yet. Does Russo know that Raphael suspects? That I don't know." Vivienne thought. She thought with the part of her brain that had spent 6 days being a chess player instead of a person, and she followed the logic out to its end. Raphael was in Boston, managing a fracturing organization, dealing with federal exposure and internal betrayal simultaneously. He had a pregnant wife who had walked out on him and taken $4.2 million in copied documents that could damage him with investigators. In that context, in that specific, complicated, chaotic context, what would Raphael do? He was rational. He was calculating. He had built an empire on the principle that emotion was a liability and that the correct move was always the move that protected the most assets and eliminated the most threats. In that context, Vivienne was not the primary threat. She was an exposure. She was a variable. But she was also the mother of his child, and she was carrying documents that could hurt him less than the internal power struggle currently cracking his organization from the inside. Lenora, Vivian said. You said Raphael suspects Russo. Yes. If Raphael had access to something that confirmed Russo's move against him, what would he do with it? A pause. He would use it. Even if it came from me? Silence. Longer this time. That's a significant question, Lenora said carefully. I know it is. I'm talking about information Russo would not want Raphael to have, Vivian said, which happens to be contained in the records I copied. If some of those transactions have Russo's fingerprints, if they show Russo operating outside Raphael's authorization, then Raphael needs to see those transactions. Vivienne. Lenora's voice had a new quality. Careful, almost concerned. What you're describing is making contact with Raphael. Yes, from a position that exposes your location. Not necessarily. There are ways to send information without sending a location. He will still try to find you. Let him try, Vivienne said. Let him be busy trying, and let Russo be busy watching Raphael try, and let both of them be looking in the wrong direction, while I finish building what I need to build. She could hear Lenora breathing on the other end of the line. That is, Lenora said finally, either the smartest thing you've said to me in 6 days, or the thing that gets you found. Do you have a better option? A pause. No. Then I need you to help me identify exactly which transactions show Russo's fingerprints. And I need a way to get those transactions to Raphael that does not connect to me, to you, to Simone, or to any location I have been in the last 48 hours. Give me 2 hours, Lenora said. I'll be here. She hung up. She sat in the quiet of Adele's apartment and pressed the phone between both palms and thought about what she had just decided. She had just decided to make contact indirect, structured, controlled, but contact with the man she had walked away from. The man whose organization had people looking for her. The man who had spent their entire marriage treating her as a strategic asset. She had decided to give him something, not as a gesture of goodwill, not from anything soft, because it was the move that gave her the most time, the most space, and the highest chance of arriving at what she actually wanted, which was not Raphael destroyed, and not Raphael appeased, but simply free. Her and her son, free. In a city she had chosen. In a life no one had designed for her. She was not saving Raphael. She was using the situation, exactly the way Russo had used it, and exactly the way Raphael had used her. She was finally playing the game she hadn't known she was in. Adele came back 40 minutes later and found Vivienne at the table with the drive, and a laptop Adele had lent her, working through encrypted financial records with the focused, unhurried attention of a conservator examining a damaged surface. Adele looked at her for a moment. Then she poured herself coffee, sat down across the table, and said, "What are you doing?" "Finding something," Vivienne said. "Something to protect yourself. Something to give someone who will protect himself, which accomplishes the same thing from a safer distance." Adele was quiet for a moment, then, "You're not what I expected." Vivienne looked up. "What did you expect?" "Someone who needed to be saved." Adele tilted her head slightly. "I don't think that's what this is." "No," Vivienne said. "It isn't." She found what she was looking for at the 11-minute mark, a series of transactions spanning 14 months, each one slightly outside the parameters of what Raphael had formally authorized through his known structures, each one routed through a layer that bore Russo's identifying signature in the way that Lenora had taught her to read financial fingerprints. Taken individually, they looked like operational decisions made by a trusted lieutenant. Taken together, with the specific destinations and the timing, they looked like a man preparing a private foundation to step into a space he intended to create, preparing for a leadership transition that Raphael had not been informed of. She encrypted the relevant files, separated them from everything else, and waited for Lenora to call back. Lenora called at 43 minutes. "There's a channel," Lenora said. "Indirect. 3 removes from anything. It'll reach Raphael through a financial intermediary who has reason to be in contact with his organization, and no reason anyone will question. It will look like a tip from a source protecting his own interests. It will not look like it came from you. Will it reach him quickly? Within 4 hours of you sending it. Then let's build it." It took 90 minutes. Vivienne walked Lenora through the specific files on an encrypted call. while Adele sat at the other end of the table doing her own work with the patience of someone who understood that some processes could not be rushed. When it was done, Vivian sat back in the chair and felt the weight of the last 14 hours settle into her shoulders and back. And everywhere, she had been carrying it without noticing. "It's ready," Lenora said. "Say the word." Vivian looked at the wall. She looked at the drive on the table. She looked at her hands, the left one bare. Now the ring removed, the finger still slightly pale where it had been. She thought about the 4 words she had left on that notepad. "I know. Good luck." She thought they were still true. "Send it," she said. The file was sent. Somewhere in Boston. In the next 4 hours, Raphael Van Trell would sit down with financial records that showed him exactly who inside his organization had been engineering his downfall. He would have a war to fight that had nothing to do with his pregnant wife. He would have a reasoned self-preservation, the most reliable motivation in his world, to be looking in a completely different direction. Vivienne would have time. She did not know how much time. She did not know if it would be enough. She did not know if Raphael, even with Russo to deal with, would still send people out of fury or hurt, or the simple reflex of a man who controlled things to find the woman carrying his child. She knew it was possible. She also knew that she had done everything she could with what she had, and that at some point a person had to make the best move available and then live inside the uncertainty of its consequences. Close the laptop. Adele looked up from her work. "Is it done?" Adele asked. "The part I can control is done," Vivian said. "Then we discuss Florence." Adele set down her pen. "I spoke with my contact there. The studio space is available. Small 1 main room, a storage area, northern light, which is what you need. It is not what you had before." "I don't want what I had before." "No." Adele studied her. "I didn't think you did." She paused. "There is one problem." Vivian waited. "My contact knows a Vivian Hartwell who studied restoration 8 years ago. If you arrive in Florence under a different name." "I'll arrive as myself," Vivian said. Adele's eyebrows moved slightly. "That carries risk, I know." Vivian set both hands flat on the table. "But I am done being someone else. I walked out of that hotel as myself, crossed the Atlantic as myself, underneath the other name for 17 hours, yes, but I am done now." She looked at Adele steadily. "If Raphael's people find me in Florence, I want them to find Vivian Hartwell. Not because I'm careless, because I am not going to spend my son's entire childhood hiding inside a name that isn't mine." Adele was quiet for a long moment. "You understand," she said finally, "that this means trusting that the information you just sent will do what you need it to do." "Yes. And if it doesn't, then I deal with that when it happens." Vivian's voice was steady. "I can't build a life around every worst case. I have to build it around the most likely case and be ready to move when things change." Adele picked up her coffee cup. She looked at Vivienne over the rim. "You know," she said, "when I wrote to you after that exhibition, when I sent the letter about the apprenticeship, I told my colleague it was because you had exceptional technical instincts." "I remember. That was true. But it wasn't the whole reason." She set the cup down. "The real reason was that you were working on that portrait, the cracked panel, and I watched you spend 40 minutes looking at it before you touched it. Every other student I had would have started intervening within 10 minutes. They would have been afraid that looking without acting meant they weren't doing their job." "I remember the portrait," Vivian said quietly. "You looked at it until you understood it completely, and then you knew exactly what to do." Adele paused. "You haven't changed. You looked at this situation for 6 days before you moved, and now you know what to do." Vivian did not answer, because what she felt in that moment was not confidence. It was not the clean, resolved calm of someone who had figured everything out. It was something more honest than that, the particular, unglamorous courage of a person who was still scared, who was still uncertain, who had made the best decision she could, with incomplete information in impossible circumstances, and who was going to get on a train to Florence tomorrow morning and open a studio and build a life for her son and herself, and simply live inside whatever came next. It was not the courage of someone who had won. It was the courage of someone who had refused to be defeated, which was different and harder, and the only kind that actually lasted. She picked up her tea. She looked out the window at the narrow Trastevere street below, dark now, lit by windows and the orange glow of the city, beyond the rooftops. "What time is the first train to Florence?" she asked. 6:40, Adele said. I'll need to leave here by 5:30. I know. Sleep first. Vivian nodded. She did not tell Adele what she was thinking. She did not say, in approximately 4 hours, a man in Boston who built his life on control is going to discover that his most trusted lieutenant has been preparing to take everything from him. And the information that tells him this came from the woman he treated as a decoration. And that will be the moment Raphael Van Trell fully understands, perhaps for the first time in his life, the precise cost of underestimating someone. She did not say any of that. She just picked up her tea and sat in the warm lamplight of an apartment full of beautiful broken things that had been made whole again. And she breathed, The train to Florence left at 6:40 and arrived at 9:53, and Vivian slept for almost all of it. Not the fragmented, crisis-adjacent sleep of the charter flight. Real sleep, the kind that came from a body that had finally decided the immediate emergency was over and had taken the decision out of her hands entirely. She woke somewhere between Bologna and Florence, with her cheek pressed against the cool glass of the window and the Tuscan landscape moving past outside, the hills green and amber in the November morning, and she sat with her hand on her belly and watched it and felt something she had not felt in so long she almost did not recognize it. Stillness. Not the performed stillness of the hotel room, not the controlled stillness of someone managing their own terror. The actual thing, the interior quiet of a person who has passed through the worst of something and come out the other side into ordinary morning light. It lasted about 4 minutes before her brain started working again. She thought about Raphael. The files had been sent 12 hours ago. Lensoris Channel 3 removes, a financial intermediary, with reason to be in contact with Raphael's organization, should have delivered them within 4 hours of sending, which meant Raphael had almost certainly been sitting with the information about Dario Russo for the better part of a night. She tried to imagine what that looked like. She could not fully do it. She had never seen Raphael in genuine crisis. She had seen him, managed, controlled, performing the calm of a man who did not panic. She did not know what he looked like when everything he had built was cracking from 2 directions at once. She thought about the 4 words she had left on the notepad. She thought about whether he understood yet what they meant. Not the surface reading, I know, good luck, the exit line of a woman who had figured out she was being used. But the deeper reading, I knew. I knew the whole time I was sitting across from you at dinner and letting you put your hand on my belly and pretending to be exactly what you needed me to be. I knew, and I was still better at the performance than you were. She thought he probably understood that by now. She thought that understanding it was going to cost him something. She could not fully calculate. The train pulled into Santa Maria Novella station at 9:58, 5 minutes late, which was practically on time by Italian standards, and Vivian stood carefully, retrieved her bag from the overhead rack, and walked off the train into Florence. The station was its usual controlled chaos commuters, students, tourists navigating luggage, the specific density of a transit hub that had been moving people in and out of the city for over a century. Nobody looked at her. She was a pregnant woman with a bag, unremarkable, invisible, in the way that people who were not looking for her would find her invisible. She took a taxi to the address Adele had given her. Not the studio, not yet. A small hotel in the Oltrarno district, the kind of place that rented by the week and did not advertise online and was known primarily to people who had been coming to Florence for decades and had been told about it by someone who had been coming for decades before them. Adele had called ahead. The woman at the desk knew Adele's name and showed Vivienne to a room on the second floor with 2 windows that faced a courtyard and a bed that looked like it had been there since 1970, and a bathroom that was small but clean. Vivienne set her bag on the floor. She sat on the edge of the bed. She looked at the 2 windows and the courtyard beyond them, a fig tree, past its fruit now, bare-limbed and patient, and she said out loud, to herself and to the baby and to no one, "We're here." The baby moved. A slow full-body shift that pressed against her ribs on the right side in a way that was increasingly uncomfortable and that she had come to think of, in the last few weeks, as his opinion. He had opinions. She was already sure of it. "I know," she said. "The bed is not ideal. We'll manage." She unpacked what she had brought, not much, but enough. She made a list of what she needed to buy in the next 2 days. She called Adele to confirm she had arrived. She called Simone from the burner phone. still using the burner, not ready to go fully public yet, and said simply, "Florence, I'm in." Simone exhaled. It was not a dramatic sound, just the quiet release of someone who had been holding something tight for a long time. "Okay," she said. "Okay, good. Have you heard anything?" Raphael's been quiet, which usually means he's busy. A pause. The internal situation in his organization is apparently significant. My source used the word destabilized. Russo. And 3 people who appear to have been aligned with Russo and are now in the position of explaining themselves to Raphael, which is not a comfortable position to be in. Vivian thought about Lenora's word, eliminate, the thing Russo had apparently been planning to do to Vivian to get the records back. Is Russo still? She started. Still operating? Simone said carefully. That's not clear. What's clear is that Raphael is occupied, and the people he might have sent in a different direction are occupied managing the internal situation. You have time, Vivian. I don't know how much, but you have some. It's enough, Vivian said. I just need enough. She went to the studio the next morning. It was on a side street off the Via de Serragli, the kind of street that was narrow enough that 2 cars couldn't pass each other without negotiation, lined with the shuttered fronts of workshops and a small wine shop that had been there since before her parents were born. Studio occupied the ground floor of a building that had been, at various points in its long life, a leather workshop, a storage space, and a small print shop. It still smelled faintly of all of these things, layered under the sharper smell of solvent and rabbit skin glue that meant a conservator had been working there recently. 1 main room, northern light through 2 high windows, a workbench along the left wall, shelving units mostly empty, a storage room in the back with a sink that worked and a small desk where the previous occupant had left a coffee maker that still functioned. Adele's contact, a compact, precise man named Giacomo, who had been a conservator for 35 years and was winding down his practice, showed her around with the economy of someone who had learned not to oversell things. The light is good, he said. Northern. Consistent. Winter is actually the best season for color work. I know, Vivian said. She was standing in the middle of the main room, turned slowly, looking at the space with the same 40-minute attention she had given the cracked portrait in Adele's seminar years ago. Looking before touching. Understanding before intervening. You worked with Adele, Giacomo said. It was not a question. I studied under her 8 years ago. She said you were the best student she'd had in a decade. He said this without flattery, just as information. She is not prone to exaggeration. No, Vivian agreed. She isn't. She took the studio. She signed the rental agreement that afternoon, her own name, her own signature, Vivian Hartwell, and she walked back to the hotel in the November light, feeling the cobblestones under her feet and the weight of the bag on her shoulder and the particular mix of exhaustion and something. She was beginning to identify cautiously as hope. Not the hope of a person who had everything figured out. The hope of a person who had a room with good northern light and a lease in her own name, and 4.5 weeks before her son arrived, and who had decided that was enough to start with. She bought supplies that afternoon. Basic materials, nothing elaborate, just enough to begin familiarizing herself with the space. She set up the workbench. She arranged the tools she had carried with her, which were not many, but were the essential ones, the ones she had bought herself over years, and had kept through everything because they were hers, and she had never let them become part of Raphael's world. She stood at the workbench in the late afternoon light, the northern windows dim now, the working day technically over, and she ran her thumb along the handle of a flat palette knife she had bought in her 2nd year of graduate school and felt, for the first time in 2.5 years, like herself. Not the herself that Raphael had known, the other self. The one that existed before him and, it turned out, continued to exist through him and after him, waiting with the patience of someone who knew that temporary conditions were, by definition, temporary. She went back to the hotel and ate dinner and slept 8 hours. She was 3 days into Florence when Raphael called. Not her, he could not reach her. She had no number he knew. He called Simone. Simone called Vivienne on the burner phone at 10 in the morning and said, without greeting, he wants to talk to you. He asked me to ask you. I told him I would ask. I am asking. Vivienne was at the studio. She had a panel in front of her, a small piece Giacomo had left behind, badly yellowed, which she was using to reacquaint her hands with the work. She set down the brush she was holding. What did he say exactly? She asked. He said, I'm not coming to get her. I just need her to know that. And I need to talk to her. A pause. Simone seemed to be choosing the word carefully. Not what I expected him to sound like. What did you expect? Controlled. He usually sounds completely controlled. And he didn't. He sounded tired, Simone said. Which I know sounds like nothing. But from Raphael Vantrell, at this particular moment, tired sounds like a lot. Vivienne looked at the panel in front of her. The yellowing was uneven worse in the upper left corner, better near the center. The varnish degraded at different rates, depending on what it had been exposed to over its lifetime. Tell him I'll call him, she said. Once. On my terms. What terms? He calls my number. I give you a number for him. He calls when I say not before. And the conversation is whatever it needs to be. And when I'm done, I'm done. Simone relayed this, apparently immediately, because she called back in 11 minutes. He agreed, Simone said. All of it. That surprises me. It surprised me too. Vivienne set up the call for the following morning, 8 a.m. Florence time. She gave Simone a number, the primary burner, which she would dispose of after, and told Raphael, through Simone, to call it exactly at 8. He called at 8. She was sitting at the desk in the storage room of the studio, because the storage room had no windows, and therefore no sightlines from the street, which was a precaution that was probably unnecessary, but that she was not ready to stop taking. She had a cup of coffee she was not drinking. Her hands were steady. Vivienne. His voice came through the phone and landed exactly the way Simone had described tired. Particular flatness of a man who had been awake for most of the last several days, managing a crisis with no clean solutions. Raphael, she said. A silence. I'm not calling to bring you back, he said. I want to be clear about that before anything else. Simone told me I mean it. I believe you, she said. And she did in the specific way that she believed Raphael's self-interest was currently aligned with leaving her alone, which was not the same as trusting him, but was functional. The information you sent, he said. About Russo. Yes. Why? She had thought about how to answer this. Because Russo was the one who sent people to find me. Not to retrieve me to retrieve the records. And when he said retrieve, he didn't mean it the way you might mean it. Pause. I know what he meant. I'm aware that you and I have opposing interests in a lot of ways right now, Vivienne said. But Russo's interests opposed both of us. Sending you those files was not a gesture of goodwill. It was accurate information deployed in the direction where it would do the most useful work. You used me, Raphael said. Not with anger. With something flatter than that. Recognition. Yes, she said. I did. Another silence. Longer. The money, he said, is legally mine to have taken. You established the structures. You gave me genuine authority. I exercised it. I know. He said this without argument. I'm not asking for it back. Good. I'm asking, he stopped. She heard him breathe. I'm asking because I need to understand. The whole time. You knew the whole time. Yes. The dinners. The mornings. You or I was doing what I had to do to get out safely, she said. You should recognize the skill set. It's the same one you've been using for 20 years. The silence after that had a different quality. She let it sit. I didn't know you were capable of it, he said finally. That's because you never looked at me, she said. Not with heat. Just the fact of it. You looked at what you needed me to be. Those are different things. She heard him shift a small sound, the creak of a chair, or the movement of a man who was not comfortable in his own body at this particular moment. The baby, he said. He stopped again. Started again. I need to know you're safe. Both of you. We're safe. We're no, she said. You don't get that. Vivienne Raphael. She said his name with the full weight of everything she was, everything she had done in the last 10 days, everything she was building in a room with northern light 3,000 miles from his world. You don't get to know where I am. Not yet. Maybe not for a long time. You get to know that I am safe, and the baby is safe, and I am choosing that, not having it chosen for me. A silence that lasted long enough that she thought he might be done. Then, is there anything? You need something. Anything. I need you to leave me alone, she said, and I need you to make sure everyone connected to you understands that leaving me alone is not optional. It's the condition. It's the only condition. Okay, he said. That means no one follows me. No one watches the accounts I accessed. There's nothing left in them worth watching. No one contacts my family to ask questions. No one appears in my life in any way that reminds me your world exists. Okay, he said again, same word, less air behind it. And in return, she said, and she had not planned to say this part, had not rehearsed it. It came from somewhere she had not fully excavated yet. In return, I won't do anything with the records I still have. Not preemptively. What I sent you was specific Russo's information. What I'm holding is broader, and it stays held, as long as you keep the condition. Another silence. You're not holding it over me, he said slowly. That's not what that is. No, she said. It's a deterrence. You know what deterrence means. You've built your whole career on it. Mutually assured cost. I'm not trying to hurt you. I'm trying to stay free. She heard something she did not expect. A small sound, brief, quickly controlled, but real. She did not know what to call it. She thought if she had to name it, she'd say it was the sound of a man confronting the specific shape of what he had lost by understanding too late, what he had never properly seen. Okay, he said, for the third time. But this time the word had a different weight entirely. Not resignation and not agreement exactly. The word of a man who had run out of the language that usually worked for him and was left with only the plainest one. Take care of yourself, Raphael, she said. She hung up. She sat in the storage room of the studio on a street in Florence and held the phone in both hands and listened to the silence and felt the baby press against her ribs and breathed. She thought she would cry. She had been expecting to cry the release valve, the thing she had been putting off since the hotel room, the grief and the relief, and all of it finally arriving at once. She didn't cry. She sat there and breathed, and after a few minutes she got up and went into the main room and looked at the panel on the workbench with its uneven yellowing, and she picked up the brush she had set down and she went back to work. The weeks that followed were not easy and not particularly dramatic, and both of those things were, she came to understand, exactly right. She furnished the studio gradually, buying things as she could afford them, choosing them with a care she had not been able to bring to anything for 2 years, this lamp, this chair, this small shelf for materials. Each object chosen because she liked it, because it worked for her, because it belonged to a life she was building, rather than one that had been designed around her. She found an obstetrician through Giacomo's wife, who had lived in the Oltrarno for 50 years and knew everything worth knowing about practical life in the neighborhood. The obstetrician was a small, direct woman named Dr. Ferretti, who examined Vivienne at the 34-week appointment and said the baby was well-positioned and healthy, and that she should sleep on her left side and drink more water, both of which Vivienne knew and was only partially succeeding at. First child? Dr. Ferretti asked. Yes. Are you alone here? I have a friend in Rome and a colleague nearby, and my family is in Boston. Vivienne paused. So technically, yes, but not in the way that means something is wrong. Dr. Ferretti looked at her over the edge of the chart with the evaluative gaze of a woman who had been delivering babies for 30 years and had developed a functional radar for the difference between women who were alone by circumstance and women who were alone by choice. You seem very clear-headed for someone in your situation, she said. I worked at it, Vivienne said. Simone came to Florence for 4 days in the 3rd week of November. She arrived with 2 large bags, one of which contained a truly excessive amount of food from a specialty shop in Boston that she had somehow managed not to have confiscated at customs, and the other of which contained things for the baby that she had been collecting for the last month without mentioning it. She walked into the studio, put the bags down, looked around the room, the workbench, the tools arranged in their order, the panel Vivienne was currently working on, the Northern Light, and she said, "This is exactly right." I know, Vivienne said. They cooked dinner that night in the small kitchen of the hotel room, which was not really equipped for cooking, but which they managed with the improvisational ease of 2 people who had known each other since they were both objectively bad at pottery. They opened a bottle of wine that Vivienne did not drink, and Simone made a visible effort not to feel guilty about, and they sat at the small table and talked for 4 hours about everything. Not Raphael, not the last month, but everything else. Simone's difficult case, a terrible movie they had both seen at different times and could now discuss in the detail it deserved. The pottery class. The particular horror of the fish pot Vivienne had made at 14 that her mother had inexplicably kept. It was the most ordinary 4 hours Vivienne had experienced in longer than she could accurately calculate. When Simone left, she hugged Vivienne at the train station carefully. Around the belly, the particular logistical challenge of hugging a 36 weeks pregnant person, and she said quietly, "You did something extraordinary. You know." "I did what I had to do," Vivienne said. "That's what makes it extraordinary," Simone said. "Most people, when they find out what you found out that night, they freeze, or they collapse, or they make noise in all the wrong directions. You went quiet, and you thought, and you planned, and you executed it without losing yourself." She pulled back and looked at Vivienne. "You didn't lose yourself, Viv." Vivienne looked at her oldest friend in a train station in Florence in late November, and thought about the woman in the hotel room in the wedding dress who had closed the tablet and opened the laptop and begun to think. She thought about the painting, the crack that was information, the difference between damaged and ruined. "No," she said, "I didn't." Lenora Pierce called once more, in the first week of December. She had, she said, severed her connection to the situation. Cleanly had done so the morning after the files were sent, which was the right professional call and the right personal call, and she wanted Vivienne to know it so that Vivienne could update her understanding of the protection structure accordingly. 2 remaining document locations are still secure, Lenora said. Providence attorney is no longer a factor. That connection is closed. What you have is clean and sufficient for the purpose. Russo, Vivienne said, is no longer. Lenora paused, choosing words with the precision she always used. Is no longer in a position to be a concern to you. I don't have details. I don't want details. But you're not being tracked by that particular threat anymore. Vivienne absorbed this. She thought about what it probably meant and chose not to think about it further. Are you safe? She asked instead. I'm careful, Lenora said, which for me is the same thing, a pause. You know, when Simone first called me when she said she had a client who needed forensic financial quickly and quietly, and who was 32 weeks pregnant and running from a Mafia boss, I almost said no. What changed your mind? Simone said, she's the smartest person in the room, and nobody knows it yet. A brief, dry sound that was Lenora's version of a laugh. I have a weakness for that particular type. Thank you, Vivienne said, for all of it. Don't thank me, Lenora said. You did the work. I just showed you where to look. She paused. Take care of the baby. I will. Good. The line went quiet, and Vivienne held the phone for a moment and then set it down and went back to the panel on her workbench. Her son was born on the 19th of December at 7:41 in the morning at a hospital 6 minutes from the Oltrarno district, in a city that had been making things beautiful for 5 centuries and seemed, on that particular Tuesday morning, to be doing so still. Dr. Ferretti delivered him with the calm efficiency of someone for whom birth was both a clinical procedure and, still, after 30 years, something she had not quite gotten used to. Vivienne labored for 11 hours, which was neither short nor excessively long, and which she experienced with the same focused, unromantic determination she brought to everything. There were points that were genuinely awful, and points that were manageable, and one point, toward the end, where she thought with complete clarity, I am never doing this again, which she knew even as she thought it was not necessarily true. Adele was in the waiting room. She had taken the train from Rome the day before and had brought a bag of things for the baby and a thermos of coffee for herself, and had sat in the waiting room for 11 hours, reading a monograph on Flemish panel painting, with the equanimity of a woman who had learned, over a long life, that some things took the time they took, and worrying about the duration was not a productive use of available energy. When Dr. Ferretti came out to tell her, Adele set the monograph down and nodded once and said, Both well? Both well, good. She picked the monograph back up. I'll wait until she's ready. Vivienne held her son for the first time, at 8:15 in the morning, in a hospital room with a window that looked out over a Florence roofline, the terracotta tiles, the dome of the Duomo visible in the distance, the December sky pale and clear, and she did not have words for it. She had expected to have words. She was a person who generally had words. In this case, she had nothing but the weight of him in her arms, and the particular way his face was arranged, which she had not known to expect, and which landed on her with the force of something she had no frame for. He looked like her grandfather. She had not anticipated that. She had thought he might look like Raphael, the dark eyes, the particular architecture of the ventral face, she had spent 2.5 years looking at. He had Raphael's coloring. She would come to see that more clearly later. But in that first morning, he looked like her grandfather, and that was the thing that finally broke the seal she had maintained since the wedding night. She cried. Not performance. Not relief exactly. The real thing, the complicated, ugly, completely honest cry of a person who had survived something enormous and was now, for the first time, somewhere safe enough to let the body do what the body had been waiting to do. His name was Matteo. She had decided it 2 weeks earlier, in the studio, looking at the panel on the workbench. Matteo Italian, which felt right given where they had landed, and also the name of a 14th century conservator she had written a paper on in her second year of graduate school, who had restored a series of damaged frescoes in a small church outside Siena, and whose notes, which had survived, revealed a person of extraordinary patience and careful attention. Matteo, her grandfather's face, Florence's light. She sent a photograph to Simone with no text, because no text was necessary. She sent one to her sister, who called immediately and talked for 6 minutes without stopping, which was very much her sister, and which Vivian absorbed with the phone against her ear and her eyes on her son, who was sleeping in the way that newborns slept, completely, absolutely, as though sleeping were his entire purpose, and he was committed to it. She sent one to Adele with a single line, "His name is Matteo." Adele responded in Italian, 2 words, "Benissimo," perfetto. She did not send one to Raphael. He found out, eventually, through the channel he had apparently maintained with enough discretion, that she did not feel it as a violation. Simone believed he had a source in the administrative offices of the hospital, which was the kind of thing Raphael would arrange quietly, which Vivienne had expected. He did not appear. He had said he would not appear. She thought. During the first weeks of Matteo's life in the particular, exhausted, non-linear time of early infancy, when hours and nights became indistinguishable and the world narrowed to feeding and sleeping and the small, specific weather of one tiny person's needs, she thought about what it cost Raphael to keep that promise. She thought it cost him something real. She thought that was important, not for his sake, but for her own understanding of what had happened. Raphael was not a simple man. He was a man who had built a life on the principle that everything and everyone could be controlled, and who had spent 42 years being largely correct about that. The things she had done, the leaving, the planning, the execution, had not simply inconvenienced him. It had reordered his understanding of what was possible, and of what he had failed to understand about the person beside him. She thought about this without either forgiveness or ongoing anger. Both of those were real things she had felt. Neither of them was where she lived anymore. The photograph arrived in January, a single envelope. No return address, Boston postmark. Inside, a photograph of a man she recognized as one of Raphael's senior attorneys, seated across from what appeared to be a federal investigator, with a document on the table between them that she could not read but whose header she could recognize as the format of a cooperation agreement. There was no note. She understood what it meant. The internal fracturing of Raphael's organization, combined with the financial exposure she had created, and the records distributed to investigators, through the channels that had been established, the first and second document locations, both still secure, had reached a point where someone in his senior circle had decided that cooperation was the better calculation. Raphael's empire was not destroyed, but it was smaller, and it was changed, and it was under a kind of scrutiny that would not go away. She put the photograph in a drawer and did not look at it again. 6 weeks after Matteo was born, she went back to the studio. She had not planned to go that early. She had planned to wait at least 3 months to give herself time to not rush the thing that couldn't be rushed. But on a Wednesday morning in late January, when Adele, who had extended her stay from Rome with characteristic practicality and had installed herself in the small hotel with complete self-sufficiency, was watching Matteo in the way that 71-year-old master conservators watched newborns, which was with intense, evaluative attention, as though she were cataloging him. Vivian walked to the studio and unlocked the door, and stood in the northern light for a long time. The panel she had been working on was still on the bench. She had left it mid-process, which she had never done before in her working life. But circumstances had been what they were. She put on her apron. She sat down. She looked at the panel for a while, looked at where she had been when she left it, assessed what the 6-week pause had done and not done, understood what the next step was. She picked up the brush, and she began. Not because everything was resolved. It wasn't. There were legal structures still being negotiated, and financial matters still in process, and a custody arrangement that had not been formally discussed, and would need to be, at some point, probably with attorneys and probably uncomfortably. There was a future that was genuinely uncertain in more ways than she could list, not because she had arrived somewhere complete and clean and finished. She began because beginning was the thing. Because a panel on a workbench that had been damaged and was not finished being restored was still waiting to be restored. And the light was good, and her hands were steady, and she was here. 5 months after Matteo was born, a tall man in a dark coat appeared outside the restoration studio on the side street off the Via de Serragli on a Tuesday afternoon. No car, no security that she could see. He stood on the other side of the studio's glass door, which she had propped open, because May in Florence was warm enough to want air, and he looked at her working, and she looked at him standing there, and neither of them moved for a moment. Then she set down the brush. She did not go to the door. She stayed at the bench, and she waited, which was its own kind of answer. He came in. He had not changed in ways that would be visible to someone who did not know him. Vivienne, who had spent 2.5 years learning the specific language of him, the way he held his shoulders, the set of his jaw, the register of tension in the space around his eyes. He looked like a man who had been through something and was carrying it differently than he had carried things before. Not softer, more honest maybe. The way that a load carried openly was different from a load hidden. He looked at the room first. The tools, the materials, the panel on the bench. He looked the way he had looked at the portrait in the exhibition, where they had met actually looking, not performing looking. Then he looked at her. "I'm not here to," he started. "I know," she said. "Simone told me you might come. She asked if I wanted to say no. And I said I'd see what you came to say." Put his hands in his coat pockets, both of them. A gesture she recognized as the thing he did when he didn't know what to do with his hands, which happened almost never. "I came to tell you I'm making changes," he said, "to the organization, to what it does and how it operates. I'm not saying I'm a different person. I'm not asking you to believe anything about who I am. I'm just telling you it's different, because you should know." "Why should I know?" she asked. "Because of Matteo." He said the name with careful pronunciation, like something he had been practicing. "Because whatever my life is, it's still his life too, partly. And you should know the shape of what that means." She looked at him. "I'm not asking to come back," he said. I know that's done." "Yes," she said. "It is. I'm asking," he stopped. Started again. "I'm asking if there's a version of this where he knows who his father is. Not what his father does. Not the world his father came from. Just who." The studio was quiet. Outside on the street, a motorbike went past. Somewhere nearby, someone was arguing over the price of something. Vivienne looked at Raphael Ventrell, the man she had loved, the man who had used her, the man who had let her go when he could have stopped her, the man who had kept his promise through 5 months of silence, and she thought about Matteo, asleep in his portable cot in the back of the studio, which was where he spent the mornings, because she was not yet ready to have him too far away. She thought about the kind of person she wanted to model for her son. Not a person who pretended things weren't complicated when they were. Not a person who made easy choices. A person who looked at the damage clearly and made the honest assessment, and then did the work of what came next. "There are conditions," she said. "I know. They're not small. I know that too. You hear them. All of them. And you agree or you don't. And either answer is the answer. And there is no negotiation." He met her eyes. "Okay." She told him the conditions. She had thought about them not obsessively, but clearly, in the honest moments of early mornings before Matteo woke, when she was most able to see things as they actually were, rather than as she wished them to be. They were not punitive. They were not designed to wound him. They were simply the conditions of a life that was hers and her son's, drawn clearly so that everyone knew where the line was. He listened. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. "That's fair," he said. "It's not about fair," she said. "It's about what's required." He nodded. "I need to think about whether I believe you'll hold to them," she said. "That's not something that happens in one conversation." "I know." "So," she looked at him, "this is the beginning of something that might, eventually, become what you're asking for. It's not a yes, it's a conditional start. That's more than I expected, he said. And the honesty of it, the complete, undefended honesty, with none of the practiced calm, landed in the room, and she let it land. You can meet him today, she said, briefly. Then you go back to Boston and we go back to this and we see what comes next, slowly, the way things that are real have to happen. He looked toward the back of the studio, in the direction of the cot. Yes, he said. It came out rough at the edges, which she had also never heard from him before. She went to the back room and lifted Matteo out of the cot. He was awake. Had been awake for a few minutes, watching the ceiling, with the profound interest he brought to ceilings, and she carried him to the door of the main room. Raphael was standing in the same spot. He had not moved. She watched his face when he saw Matteo, and she thought, there it is. The thing that could not be performed. The thing that had no strategy in it, no calculation, no useful application, just a man looking at his son for the first time, and understanding something so large and so plain that all the 20 years of armor were, for this one moment, completely insufficient. She did not go closer. She stayed in the doorway. This was not a reunion, and it was not a reconciliation, and it was not any of the things that stories usually required it to be. It was a first meeting between a father and a son, witnessed by a woman who had survived enough to be standing on her own feet in a room that was hers, holding a child who was hers, in a city she had chosen. Matteo looked at the tall man across the room with the solemn, evaluative gaze of a 5-month-old who was still forming opinions about the world and had not yet decided to have inhibitions about forming them openly. Then Matteo made a sound, not a word, not anything like a word, just a small declarative noise that was entirely his own, and reached his hand toward something invisible, in the middle distance, the way babies reached for things they couldn't name yet, but wanted anyway. Vivian shifted his weight in her arms, and looked at the northern light coming through the studio windows, and thought about the panel on the workbench. The damaged thing that was being carefully, patiently made whole again, not by pretending the crack had never happened, not by filling it in and covering it over, but by understanding the damage, stabilizing it, and working with what remained. Crack was information. The damage had happened. But she was still here. Her son was still here. The light was good, and she had work to do.